We're 5 weeks into the fantasy season, and almost every team could use a running back upgrade. Let's talk about some buy low running backs you can go out and try to get right now. Hey, welcome back, Endgame. I'm Chris, and I'm going to give you some of my favorite buy low running backs as we head into week 6. And let's start again with Jonathan Taylor. Nothing about Jonathan Taylor's value has changed from last week. Didn't play in week 5, dealing with that ankle injury. Not really sure when he'll be back yet. Didn't practice at all leading up to week 5, so it wasn't like he was close. It wasn't like he almost played. Really was no chance he was going to play in week 5. Thankfully, they had the extra time with the Thursday night game. Maybe he'll be ready for week 6. Maybe he won't. But it doesn't matter. Jonathan Taylor is still a great buy low running back because people who have Jonathan Taylor have A, seen him be really bad for the 3 games before he got hurt, and B, probably are desperate right now because they're not winning fantasy games with Jonathan Taylor sitting on their bench. Now is the time to go get Jonathan Taylor. I still think this guy is going to be great rest of season unless you believe that a 24-year-old running back in the prime of his career, one of the best prospects we've seen in years, unless you believe that guy is going to be bad, you have to try to get Jonathan Taylor. Remember, this guy was the running back 11 after week 5 last year, and we saw what he did in the second half. That's what really matters at this point. Whatever's happened has happened. You got to put that behind you. Try to look forward. Try to project forward. I still think Jonathan Taylor will be a great running back, at least a top 5 running back rest of season once he gets on the field and once he is healthy. And it's not going to cost you nearly as much to get Jonathan Taylor as it would have last week, the week before, week 3, week 2, whatever it is. His value is really, really low at the moment. So still keep trying, see if you can get Jonathan Taylor. And then another running back whose stock just keeps dropping and dropping is Joe Mixon. But you have to be encouraged by what you see. No, you're not encouraged by the fantasy points, but his usage is still there. And what we did see here in week 5 against the Ravens is he actually looked better, breaking off bigger runs, yards per carry way up. Now, granted, we did see Samaje Perine in the 2-minute drill. That is a little concerning, but still, Mixon's usage is absolutely great. If he was scoring touchdowns at the rate of, say, Nick Chubb, who, by the way, both these guys have had similar opportunities to score touchdowns, nobody would be worried about Joe Mixon right now, but he's not scoring touchdowns. So people are worried about Joe Mixon right now. These things have a way of correcting themselves. He'll start to score touchdowns, and when he does, and when this offense gets better and gets healthy and starts clicking again, Joe Mixon is going to help a lot of fantasy teams in the second half and down the stretch. And again, like Jonathan Taylor, his value is even lower right now. You're not going to have to give up a stud wide receiver to potentially get Joe Mixon. So go out, see if you can get him right now. Yeah, maybe he struggles for another week or two, but eventually he will turn it around. And when he does, he's going to help your fantasy team. All right, one more guy whose buy low window is shutting quick is DeAndre Swift. Now, chances are he will be back from injury after the team's bye. But that's why he's still a buy low, because they are on a bye this week. And the player who has DeAndre Swift in your league, they may need to win this week. They can't have DeAndre Swift sitting on their bench getting 0 points in a must-win spot. If they've got 1 win, 2 wins, and they are desperate, go see if you can get DeAndre Swift. Plus, Jamal Williams has looked good. I know he didn't do a whole lot in week 5, but he's looked good up to that point, looked great in week 4. And people are also worried that maybe DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams are in some kind of a timeshare, and that kills DeAndre Swift's value. Plus, you always got to factor in recency bias. Nobody has seen DeAndre Swift in 3 weeks. Well, that's not true. They haven't seen him in 2 weeks, but the week before that, they really didn't see him because he barely played. And people just think, well, that's what's going to happen the rest of the season. He was overhyped. He's not going to live up to expectations. So another guy who has true top 5 potential, especially in PPR leagues, whose value will not require a top 5 player in return, is DeAndre Swift. Go get him now while he's on the bye week, and then you have him healthy, hopefully, for the rest of the season. All right, now I'm going to give you potentially my favorite buy low running back right now, and that is Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne has been one of the biggest busts of the draft this year. There's been a lot of them, but he's been one of the biggest ones. And in a lot of leagues, he was dropped. So if he's on your waiver wire, you got to go get Travis Etienne right now. But I know in most leagues, he's still rostered. He's still on people's benches. But we've seen it now 2 weeks in a row. Travis Etienne not only starting to get more of the work in this backfield, but looking significantly better than James Robinson. Not just a little bit better than James Robinson, like on two totally different levels here. And I talked about it the whole beginning of the season, the whole offseason about Breece Hall and Michael Carter. Talent will rise, and coaches can't keep talent off the field for long. I don't care if Doug Peterson likes James Robinson. It's obvious that James Robinson is not close to the same guy coming off that Achilles injury. Another terrible game, 2.7 yards per carry. He had that nice start to the season, but that was more based on volume and scoring touchdowns. Outside of that one big run against the Chargers, which we now know every running back rips off big runs against the Chargers. Outside of that one big run, James Robinson averaging barely over 3 yards per carry on the season. He leads the league in rushes that have gone for 1 or fewer yards. He's not getting it done. And Travis Etienne was incredible yesterday, picking up huge gains almost every time he touched the ball, ripping off big runs in the receiving game, in the ground game. He's going to eventually take over this backfield just like Breece Hall did. Now, I don't think he's going to have the share that Breece Hall is getting, but he's going to be the lead back sooner rather than later. And people still think this guy is a bust, and you can get him very, very cheaply right now. Now is the time to strike, kind of like Breece Hall, who I told you about weeks ago. You got to strike now. It might not happen in week 6. It might not happen in week 7, but it's going to happen sooner rather than later. And when it does, you're going to wish you had Travis Etienne. And then another running back who I feel is always undervalued is David Montgomery. This guy just puts up solid RB2 numbers year after year, and nobody ever wants to draft this guy, and nobody ever wants to have this guy on their fantasy team. And we saw it here in week number 5, came back from that injury. Everybody was like, well, it's going to be a split, just like they said last year. And guess what? It wasn't a split. It was almost all David Montgomery. Now, obviously, he's on the Bears, which isn't great because it's a terrible offense. They don't run a lot of plays. They don't get a lot of chances to score. But he's still the guy, and he's still a good running back. So no, this isn't a guy like JT or Swift or Mixon or maybe even Etienne who has really huge upside potentially. This is a guy who's more like, hey, I need an RB2 that I can just put into my lineup every week and feel fairly good about. That's what David Montgomery will be for your fantasy team. And he's not going to require much to get because he hasn't done a whole lot this season. Didn't do a whole lot in week 5. His value is extremely low right now. So if you have somebody on your bench, a decent wide receiver on your bench who's probably never going to crack your lineup outside of maybe a bye week, see if you can make the move and you'll have a solid every week RB2 who actually does have decent upside and once again has a pretty good playoff schedule. And then finally, I'm going to end with Brian Robinson in Washington. No, it wasn't a great game, but that was to be expected. First game back from being shot twice in the leg, which that right there is amazing, right? To be back already by week 5. But you have to be encouraged by what you saw. He led the team with 9 carries. Now, granted, it's only 9 carries, but he led the team in his first game back from being shot twice. That's ridiculous. Now, the downside here is he didn't catch any passes. Maybe that will change, but we do know Gibson's a good pass catcher. McKissick's a good pass catcher. So he may just be an early down, first, second down, goal line, short yardage kind of back. But again, that still brings value. And people are looking at Brian Robinson right now, and they're not seeing much. Like, yeah, he's back, and everybody got excited for that. But then he did nothing in week 5. And the Commanders are a terrible football team. And people are just not very high on Brian Robinson right now. So another guy who potentially, in a week or two will be in every week, set in your lineup, don't worry about it, RB2 type, who's not being valued like that at all because, he missed the first 4 weeks of the season and then did pretty much nothing here in week 5. So another guy, I'm saying go trade for him now before he breaks out. It could be week 6 because he's only going to get more and more usage and more work. And he's only going to get better and better as he recovers from these injuries and gets used to the NFL speed and the NFL game. So go get him right now while his value is extremely low. So now that you know some of my favorite buy low running backs, you need to know some of my favorite buy low wide receivers, plus who to start, who to sit, everything you need to help you win your week 6 matchup. We've got you covered. Check out this playlist right here. All our videos in week 6.